Chris, thank you very much for coming on today's episode. We've been trying to get you on for some time, so it's great to finally have you here. I'd love to dive straight in by asking, what is the difference between a digital twin and a human avatar? Are we expected to have one in our medicine cabinet or in our patient records in the next few years? How does it all work?
Great, Gemma. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast. It's great. It's great to be here. So about the virtual human digital twins, we hear a lot of these terms, in the media, which is great, by the way, but also in industry. So it's very nice to clarify. So to start with, I will just keep human avatars to the side for a second, but really focus on digital twins and virtual human or virtual human twins. So digital twin is a term that refers to effectively a computer model of anything. You have factories that can be modeled using computer software. So you basically simulate all the units, and you will simulate or represent all the materials, if you like, that are being added, and the transformation process. And you get to the end of it, and you have whatever you produce. That is actually a digital twin. In this particular case, it's also called a digital factory. When we decided to apply these principles to humans, it also started by being called virtual digital twins, but it's a little bit complicated when you try to make the difference. So a group in Europe got together and came up with the term virtual human twin, and with a very precise definition of what that is. I'm going to read it because I knew you were going to ask that question. So I thought, rather than trying to guess, I will actually put it out and read it. So the organization, the EU-backed organization that worked on the definition of the virtual human twin is called EDITH, EDITH. And what they say is a virtual human twin is the digital representation of a human health or disease state. They refer to different levels of human anatomy, can be cell, tissue, organs, or organ systems. And virtual human twins are effectively built using software models and data, patient data, and they are designed to mimic and predict behavior of their physical counterparts, including the interaction with additional disease a person may have. And the virtual human twin is used to predict quantities of interest, which are medical indication. And the purpose is to help develop better drugs, better devices, and to improve human health. So in a nutshell, I know it's a lot of words, but that is what a virtual human twin is. The principle is the same as the generic digital twin. So it's about representing system using computer models that can be AI or physics based, and to represent those systems so that it can generate useful information to improve the processes themselves or to improve the outcome of what you're effectively modeling. Applied to human, it really is about improving health.
Okay, well, that brings me on to thank you for that explanation, Chris. That brings me on to my next question then. We talk a lot about AI, but I think this technology is more reliant on simulation. Is that right?
Virtual human twins can be either. They don't have to be simulation, but what we do at ELEM is very focused on three-dimensional modeling. So starting from patient information, and the root of it is patient images or organ images, we then reconstruct using computer systems the organ in 3D virtually in the computer. We apply the properties of the organ to make it replicate the organ function. And then we use this as the basis for testing drugs and devices. So we use what is called, physics based engines or mechanistic models, which are a bit different to pure AI that rely on data sources exclusively. But nowadays we tend to mix both.
Okay, and how does that work with drug and device development, for example, then? Can that really change and replace traditional methods of clinical trials?
The idea of having those virtual humans and virtual human twins is effectively to replace certainly animal models, to bring additional information in the early stages of design and development, whether for drugs or devices, and certainly not to replace clinical trials yet, but at least to accompany clinical trials, and in cases offer the possibility to test where you cannot do a trial. So we can take these in different stages. When you are doing animal testing, typically you have to then translate the results. You have to translate what you get from the animal indications, and you have to guess. Well, it's not guessing, but you have to do some complex approximations to then be able to say, look, in the mice or in the dogs or in the monkeys, you had this result, this outcome. In human, because we are not quite the same, it will be that. So this effort is called translational science, and it is very complex. So if you can actually have human models that behave like of having to extract information in animals and then translating them. Okay, so the I would say that's the very clear goal that we have, and it's not only one that we have at ELEM. Other companies working in similar technologies, even AI-based modeling, or they wanted to phase out animal testing, I think by 2030. So I mean that might be a little bit ambitious, but you have to set ambitious targets to get there. So certainly eliminating animal trials where they are inconclusive is something that we can do, and human models are now in some of these cases they're better than animal models themselves. When you look at clinical trials, so really the inhuman testing, there it's different. You really try to understand what are going to be the adverse effects of drugs on us, on human beings. So you are limited if you just run a clinical trial by the number of candidates you're going to have. Being able to do a virtual trial, so using virtual humans and creating virtual populations, gives you the possibility to have a lot more scenarios, many more patients, many more subjects than you would have in a real trial. So it does not replace it, but it can comfort the outcome from your trial, and it can also help you design it. If a pharma company or device company wants to address patients with a specific type of pathologies, how far can they push the envelope? If you simplify the inclusion-exclusion criteria, that will lead to a lot of time savings, probably also limits failure in the trials themselves, and also give confidence to people who are enrolling or taking part in these trials. So in clinical stages, it's about accompanying trials, helping refine the design of real trials, and also increase the significance of the outcomes from real trials. And then you get to the last group, which is what happens if you cannot test? It's very, very difficult, for example, to do trials on children. It's very difficult to do trials on patients who suffer from terminal stages of cancer. It's very difficult to do trials on people who have very rare conditions. If you can develop virtual humans and virtual human twins that replicate those patients and their conditions, and you can have this as a testing environment, then there are virtually no limit of what you can test. So you
That's
increase the
incredible.
capacity to test, and you increase the capacity to include diversity and significance of outcomes from trials by going virtual.
That's absolutely incredible. I mean, that sounds like a real game changer. Could it be applicable for pregnant women as well, for example? Could you replicate that?
So you have a lot of talks about how to make trials more inclusive. Virtual populations can be female male. It's very important to understand what the purpose of a trial is. The purpose of a trial is to gain certainty into the effect of a drug. So when you understand this, you will also appreciate that you want to control as much as possible any sort of variability across populations. And one of the things that you want to do is avoid taking into account or having to take into account effects that are random, or at least that can be considered random. One of the reasons, one of them, why you probably don't have as many women in clinical trials as we ought to have is typically because the menstrual cycle provokes hormonal changes that will modify the way a drug or is assimilated by the body and the way the woman's body will react to the drug. But it's very, very difficult to know exactly when somebody enters into a trial, what is the stage of the menstrual cycle they're in? How do you control that? How do you control the excess or the change in hormones, hormone levels? How do you take into account these phenomena? It's very hard to do. So that is one of the reasons why pharmaceutical companies do not like to include too many women, because it's a source of variability at trial level that they can't control. Virtually, of course, this is a parameter. So we can actually decide that we're going to have all our virtual women who will be at the beginning of the cycle, or in the middle, or at the end of it. And you can start to do this. When you tackle pregnancy, it's way more complicated. Eventually, yes, the idea is to be able to do this. And we are doing studies, we are looking at this. We had a recent case where we've actually already taken the images from a woman at different stages of pregnancy. We followed the different stages, one of our colleagues. And what you see is that even the position of the heart really changes. So the heart is, shifted up in the thoracic gate because you need to have the space for the baby. So even morphologically, you have things that have to be taken into account. And of course, the idea is to model all these things. So eventually, yes, I certainly do hope that we will be able to look at the effects of drugs and devices, drugs in particular, in pregnant women. Yes.
Okay, that's really interesting, and it sounds like it will be really informative for an area that hasn't had much research at all, for obvious reasons, for reasons you explain. You did around COVID-19 that was informative as well. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And it was actually the beginning of our story, testing drugs. We had one of our, sponsors and I would say early fans, if I may call so, a French doctor who called us at the beginning of COVID and said to me, Chris, everybody is talking about chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine for treating COVID patients. Can your model address this problem? And we said to him, look, the models are ready. We haven't actually tested it, but we could try. And within the space of 3-4 weeks, we had actually run models that represented the conditions of COVID patients. And typically, we can't model COVID itself. It was, it's impossible to do this at the time. But what we could know is that if you have respiratory difficulties, then suddenly your heart rate is going to go up. And the question around chloroquine and so on and so forth was whether it was safe to administer these drugs to patients with advanced COVID. So what we did is actually we took our cardiac models, we modeled different human hearts, we modeled them under high heart rates, so typically at 150 BPM. So beats per minute, which is typically when you start to be stressed, when you're hyperventilating, your heart rate goes up because you still need to, pump bloody oxygen, in your body. And so your heart rate goes up. And so what we did is basically conduct cardiac safety studies. So we administered different dosages of these drugs and looked at the safety effect on the heart. And we did actually notice that there were cases where you would induce very dangerous arrhythmias into patients if you administer what were at the time the medical dosages of hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin.
That's crazy. Wow. I'm blown away by that. So do you think that really could have changed the course of that drug being used for COVID patients, had they have had
Well,
this information?
so these drugs were not eventually exhaustively used. Yes, there was a case where unfortunately there were fatalities. They did a trial, and you know, basically people were administered those drugs, and it didn't end well. Um, Whether these patients would not have unfortunately passed away, that's hard to tell. However, certainly, if we had been able to do these studies early enough, and if we had published on this, for example, clearly they would not have tried it.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that leads on to my next question that I think people would be really interested to have your feedback on. How do you handle variability in your models?
Look, variability, of course, when you look at population, so when you look at when you look at populations, we're all different. And especially, I talk a lot about the heart because this is one of the primary sources of the work that we do. We have other activities, but we work a lot on cardio. So our hearts are different. They're different anatomically. So your heart is different. So the first way we integrate variability is by making sure that we have libraries of human hearts to build our models. So that's the first thing. Then we have also developed other tools to be able to extend this variability, and we always verify, of course, very meticulously that this behaves like it's supposed to. The other aspect is at the cellular level. So our cells are different, and there is a lot of research that is being conducted into myocytes, the cardiac cells, to characterize how basically the properties of the cell change within a fairly broad spectrum of individuals. So we integrate this variability at cellular level into our models too. And then you have additional parameters like what I mentioned earlier, so hormonal cycles or these sort of things, or age. There are different parameters in the model that have been calibrated to take into account these changes. And we ensure when we generate populations that we will cover as broad a spectrum as possible of these parameters so that you have a broader indication, a broader understanding of what happens, what is the response at population level if you give different dosages of drugs, or if you administer, if you introduce a device into these patients. So that's how we do it, by making sure that you have a broad variability as possible, but controlled, always controlled. We always know exactly how much of what is being added to the model, so that you have a population response, and you can also isolate or identify which are the candidates, which are the subjects that are likely to respond not well to the treatment, because those are the ones you want to isolate, right?
Okay.
The first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the treatment is safe. Then you want to look at the efficacy side. But first of all, it must be safe. And if you work, so safety is something that applies to anything. You take an aspirin, you take paracetamol, you want to make sure that it's safe. So it's got nothing to do with the heart itself, but you want to make sure that it's safe. If you look at the cardiac drugs, treatments that are designed to improve your heart, then you have to look at the cardiac function. You want to make sure you can recover this. So depending on what you're looking at, you will introduce more or less complex parameters to the model. But the idea is always that. Try to have as broad a population that is representative of the indication that you want to work on, or the therapeutic area you want to focus on. These two aspects. Make sure that you get your virtual humans right for this. Maximize the variability, get the largest possible sample and data set to verify that you have the desired outcome, and then you plug that into your real trial, or you plug that into your reports.
Okay, that's a really informative explanation there, Chris. Thank you. So we've spoken about the efficacy and the variation. What about the ethics? I mean, the ethical concerns for traditional trials, I think, are obvious. But how is that applicable here?
Um, Look, it should make it easier
I mean, that's what I would
because,
assume. Yeah.
yeah. So when we create virtual humans, we we do not need data that is not anonymized. When we will get to precision therapeutics, that might be a little different. But if we focus first on the development of drugs or devices, when we talk about the R&D phase or the clinical trials or the evidence generation stages, what you need is to prove to the regulators that your treatment is fit for purpose. It doesn't matter if it's Jackie, Paul, or Robert. What counts is that you demonstrate that it is safe and it gives you the effect that you expect to get out of it.
Mm.
So the fact that we do not need personal information makes it ethically much more compliant from the onset.
Mm.
Of course, you may have cases where the regulators may come back to us and say, okay, but how can I trace that information? How can I make sure that this is okay? Well, that's the question that is quite complex. But I think we the way we're addressing it at the moment is by replicating real studies and showing that the virtual cohorts give you results that you can use to make those decisions. So hopefully, ethics is not a problem.
Mm.
The basic issue at the beginning, you could say, okay, what happens if you acquire data that initially under GDPR, for example, belongs to a patient and you use that to create a model? So we are making sure now that as much as possible, we do take these things into account. We go through ethics committee at times. We talk with doctors to make sure that it's okay to do that. And the other way that we've overcome those limitations as well is by making sure, for example, that every person who joins our company does an MRI. And so we are modeling our own hearts. We have access also to public databases. So we're combining this information to make sure that we don't have those ethics issues.
Mhm.
When you get to precision cases, so if you want to model a specific person's heart, like we do on devices, we don't do this so much in drugs because, as I said, for drugs, the most important part is to really get to that approval, to get that significance at population level, and to know what the limitations are, and if you have a risk to have outliers. For devices, when you look at implantable devices, so pacemakers or valves, you have to be personalized. You have to go to patient-specific cases because that's the only way to measure exactly what sort of gain you're going to get. You can do generic testing, of course, but what is of interest is really to go personalized.
Mhm.
Now, in this case, you could say, when we get the real patient, we will have to get their consent to do this, of course. Now, my question would be, why would anyone not want it?
Mm.
And my experience also so far, whether it's during conferences, when I travel, when whoever we meet, myself, my colleagues, everyone, when we explain what we do at LM, which is modeling the heart, modeling the respiratory system, modeling this for the purpose of improving the possibility for better designs, better treatments, better therapeutics, better everything. The question I usually get is, can I give you my data?
Yeah,
It,
well, I was
it's
thinking the
not.
same. I
It's
was
not.
just
Can I
thinking
withhold
that.
it from you, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I would more
And
than
when you
happily do
get
an MRI for you. Yeah.
well, you're most welcome. The important thing is that we take standard MRIs to build the model, so you don't need to go through a specific procedure. It's very standard, and we get standard images, and from those images we rebuild the models.
Mm.
So as I said, so ethics is not an issue, and I would also say that when you then get to rare conditions or to pediatrics, or when you basically consider underserved population groups, the regulators themselves are eager to see companies take steps towards finding ways to test.
Mm. I was actually going to ask you about regulatory. I mean, that's a big part of what we do in our industry. How is the regulatory process for technology like yours? Is it very different? Is it complicated? Is it have you had to create new pathways to regulation? What's been your experience?
Yeah, the regulators are a really important set of bodies, whether the EMA in Europe, MHRA in the UK, the FDA in the US. So, every country have their own regulatory agencies and movements that decide to work together with others so that they create an environment that is safe for doing all the testing and before of course approving treatments for real patients. So they do a really important job. And of course, in some cases, they have a tough job, which is to adjust to new technologies. So you have new ways now for testing and everything that has to do with data-based, technology. So AI, everything that has to do with modeling, physics modeling or patient modeling that we do. So they can't create a framework until the technology is there.
Yeah.
Until the technology is there and until the technology is approved. But the important thing is that they are actually very much engaged in the process. The FDA was probably the first regulatory body to really push for this.
Wow.
So in the first studies that I found from the FDA regarding modeling probably date back to like 2008, 2010, with the first sort of committee gathering, around 2011 and producing studies and saying, we have to look into this. Then they actually formed a group within the FDA, really looking at modeling and simulations. It goes back to 2015. So they've been really pushing for this. I think they have a very active role towards enabling innovation in this space. The EMA recently has also been very proactive. I know in the UK, MHRA is also being proactive. So all the agencies want to believe in science-driven solutions. They not only that they I think they realize that there are limitations to the current way of approving treatments, and they want to see more evidence. They want to see more thorough testing. They want to see safer, more effective products. So they are completely engaged in this system, but they can't do it alone. So the work that we do, we work with companies to replicate, as I said, trials, to test what we do, to publish it. So we're generating a body of evidence to back our solutions. And I think that is what the others also do. So what the regulators then have to step by step integrate is that understanding of what they need to regulate and how they have to do that, and then to adapt the regulations so that they can also put their seal of approval on companies working in this field. What is really important though is that, and we always say this, to at the beginning, when you are helping companies make decisions, you don't need to be regulated. The regulatory requirements come in when you focus on patient-specific outcomes or patient diagnostics. So if you create tools or technologies that will or that are aimed to guide the way a doctor is going to treat a patient, then you need to be regulated.
Chris, I could talk about this all day with you, but we're running out of time. Sadly, I feel like we should do another episode. As we come to a close today, what are your final thoughts for ELEM Digital Twins? What do you think is essential for the future of this space?
That's a really tough question to to close, and we could have a long conversation about this. Look, I think everything in the market is now ready to welcome growth in this space. So companies are really opening up to the introduction of virtual human twin technologies, and are opening up to integrate these into their processes. They not necessarily know how to yet. So that's one aspect we're working on. How do you start to integrate this? The other aspect that I think that is very favorable is what we discussed. The ourselves, the people. We are much more tech savvy than we were even a decade ago. We are much more exposed to technologies that help us take more control or be at least more active in our own health, whether it's your app that monitors your heart rate or the one that tells you how many steps you take. So I think the appetite from the general public, from ourselves towards this sort of technology is absolutely there. And I think also, to be honest with you, I think what's been happening with generic AI, so the chat GPT and all these things, is also massively helping. So I think that context is there. As I mentioned, and the regulators are also, ready to take steps to set to create frameworks around it. So I think all of these aspects are great. So we just need to accelerate. We just need to embrace it. We just need to have the capacity to develop and test even further and faster, to make the technology more and more realistic. We've already reached levels of precision, as I said, that comparing to animal studies have demonstrated that it's virtually humans give you closer results to in-human responses than animals. We can do things that we cannot do, so we're opening up the space to generating new indicators, based on computational results, things that you cannot measure in patients. So I think all of that is there. So yeah, so I think it's just about everybody understanding how they can then introduce that, and making sure that we start to build economic models around this. Because it's you're transforming processes, you're changing the way people work, and it's more that cultural change, those business processes. So we need to find a way to accelerate this. Ideally, that would be great. And
Well,
of course, you always need more money.
that's always the case. But I think if anyone's going to do it, you and ELEM are going to do it for sure. And you're a wealth of information. Thank you so much for coming on today and giving us your insights and knowledge about digital twins and ELEM. And it's been a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Lovely talking to you, and talk again soon.
Cool. Today we explored the evolving roles of digital twins, we broke down the basics of simulation in drug and device development, and examined the real-world impact on clinical trials and patient outcomes. We also discussed how diverse virtual populations are built, and their ethical and regulatory implications, and how patient input and real-world data help refine predictive models. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who might find it useful. You can find all the resources we talked about today, including the links to the studies and tools, in the show notes on LinkedIn, X, TikTok, and YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We appreciate your support and love hearing from you.